Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, where you are. Thank you for joining us.
Good day.
Good day, good day. So we'll be starting momentarily. Thank you so much. Okay, so welcome, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon. Welcome back to the Adaptation webinar series for adaptation reporting under the ETF of the Paris Agreement. Today's session is the second of 5 sessions that we'll be having in the month of October, and I am glad that you all could make it today. This, as I mentioned in the last session, this is the prime time for countries who are preparing their biennial transparency reports, and as such, the support to provide guidance on reporting on adaptation is a crucial element, especially for this region, for the Caribbean, as well as for all small island developing states. So today's session, session 2, will provide an overview of the contents of the first 3 sections of the MPGs, that's sections A, B, and C, for the adaptation component of the BTR. And so it will provide guidance on how to report on the following areas with examples from national communications, NAPs, and NDCs. So we'll be looking at national circumstances, the legal frameworks and institutional arrangements with relation to the adaptation BTR, impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities, as well as prioritizing adaptation areas and the barriers that would be faced. So with that, I would like to introduce again and welcome again our kind guest and speaker and expert, Slajana Bundalo. She is the regional coordinator for the Eurasia Transparency Network of the CIBIT GSP Transparency Networks, and she's our adaptation expert and will be taking us today through the components of the first 3 areas of the MPGs for the adaptation communication. And for the rest of the agenda, we will also hear from our country. So we'll also hear an experience from Jamaica, sharing their experience on reporting adaptation under the existing reporting arrangements and hearing their experience with regards to national circumstances, institutional frameworks, and arrangements within their countries. This will be followed by a Q&A discussion, and then we will have a series of breakout discussion groups on the different topics, right, regarding assessing impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities, as well as where can information required to report on adaptation, priorities, and barriers be sourced from. So with that, I would like to hand it over to you, Slajana. Welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brittany. Good morning and good day to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us today. I really believe that you just started a great day this morning and that you are eager to hear something new in regards of the adaptation reporting through your BTRs. So I will share now my screen. So as Brittany said, today we will provide you with the information about an overview of the sections A, B, and C within the MPGs of the adaptation part of your BTRs. So before we start through actual sections of the BTR and guidelines and requests for information defined there, I just would like to show you this very, very practical table prepared by our colleagues from the UNFCCC, actually their climate group of experts, which provides an overview of the information as per different guidelines for the different adaptation communication instruments. So you can see here on the left of the table type of the information required by guidance for the specific instrument, and on the right side you see the instruments and information on requirements of specific information for that. So BTR, adaptation communication, NAPS, national communication for Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 parties. So this can be a great starting point for your adaptation reporting within the BTR, since here you can see where you can source information necessary for your BTRs. So yes, the most information you can find in your adaptation communication in your NAPS, but also within your national communications. So let's start with an overview of the sections A and B. The BTR guidance for the section A and B seeks countries to provide information about national circumstances, institutional arrangements, and legal framework in the section A, and impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities in section B. Information requested by these two sections is critical in order to allow the readers of the BTR to understand how a country is vulnerable to adverse effects of the climate change and what capacity the country has to adapt to these circumstances. So start from the section A. The section A has to ensure that BTR include description about countries' key characteristics. And this information is important for understanding the starting point for adaptation planning and implementation process at the national level. So the information required here can be divided at two broad categories. The first one is information about countries' national circumstances under bullet point A, or information about institutional, legal, and policy frameworks relevant to facilitating adaptation that you can see in under the bullet points B and C of the paragraph 106 of the MPGs. So information about the national circumstances relevant to adaptation is requested by bullet point E, which requests information about national circumstances relevant to their adaptation actions. When asking this information, bullet point A provides countries with a list of areas that would ideally be covered in the national circumstances section. So these are biogeographical characteristics, demographics, economy, infrastructure, information on adaptive capacity, and this list can be extended. It represents a pretty good starting point for providing information. And in the actually next 5 slides, I'll go quickly through these 5 areas. So the first is information about biogeographical characteristics. In these areas, countries can provide information about their geographic and environmental context, and that can include information about country's climate, marine and land ecosystems and land use in your country, then availability and security of the resources like water, land, and food, and also your country's exposure to the natural disasters. The second area requested is demographics. And in this area, countries can provide information about characteristics of the country's population, such as population size, age, distribution, education, livelihoods, cultures, and future trend related to this information. Also, information on disparities and differences between regional, ethnic and cultural groups or between genders, about the poverty, development challenges your country is facing, and related goals. The third area asked for information is economy, which is more or less clear, but just to know that information can include the characteristics of the national economy, like size, growth, reliance on the certain sectors and future trends, differences between regions or rural and urban economies, and development goals relating to the economy. The fourth area asked for information is infrastructure, which can include information about key public infrastructure like for transport, power, water, health, also about the present and continued ability of infrastructure to contribute to development goals, then future trend and goals, and past losses and damages to infrastructure related to climate change. And the final area asked here is information about adaptive capacities. And reporting on this is a bit different than other four categories, not so much as while it would make sense to describe biogeographical characteristics, demographics, economy, infrastructure in the report separately, like in their own subsectors. In practice, information about the adaptive capacity could be integrated across the other four already mentioned areas, and also can be included in its own standalone section. Also, information about adaptive capacity may be a bit trickier compared to other areas, as reporting on adaptive capacity is in a robust way would require countries to have conducted assessments of adaptive capacities for different economic, social, and natural systems described in its national circumstances chapter. So in regard to this, countries can focus on ability of infrastructure, ability of institutions, their institutions and systems to adjust to impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities, and opportunities to cope with these available resources and adaptation options in different sectors. So also it is important to mention that in absence of the formal assessment, adaptive capacity could be conducted using just a simple reasoning, like something that is obvious, like poverty in rural areas could be used as a grounds to generally conclude that adaptive capacity of that specific area or rural farming system is low. So to conclude this area, the primary purpose of providing information about national circumstances in your country reports is to provide the readers and wider audience with the basis for better understanding and underlying reasons for how the situation on ground that contributes to your country's vulnerability to certain climate hazards, and why your country is prioritizing certain areas for adaptation and certain types of adaptation action for implementation. The next is information about institutional, legal, and policy framework. The information here is requested by bullet point B and C of the guidelines. So in addition to information about general national circumstances relevant to adaptation, guidelines are also looking for countries to provide information about their existing institutional arrangements and legal and policy frameworks that are designed to facilitate climate change adaptation. In this context, the term institutional arrangements is referring to the arrangements that exist between actors to facilitate and implement different aspects of the adaptation process within the country. So communication channels, cross-ministerial committees, sectoral consultation forums, data sharing agreements, etc. And also governance refers how the responsibility for adaptation is allocated between different stakeholders. So which levels of the government are responsible for planning or implementing of the adaptation. In addition, the term legal and policy frameworks refer to the information on legal instruments and policies that direct adaptation actions, assign responsibility to certain actors, clarify governance structure, and establish institutional arrangements. In the same time, regulations are the legal instruments available to countries that form a part of its legal and policy framework. So usually these frameworks are used to operationalize primary legislation by translating in, for example, in specific sectoral requirements. The purpose of including this information in your BTR is to allow the readers to understand the extent to which there is a robust legal and institutional basis that enables adaptation planning, implementation, and related processes. Also, where the various roles and responsibilities lie in relation to adaptation process, and also if and where there are any gaps in your country's institutional, legal, and policy framework. Just to, let's say, remind all of us that institutional arrangements refer to how organizations and structures are set up to handle specific tasks and responsibilities. And these arrangements are, of course, different from country to country based on their circumstances, priorities, and the need to inform stakeholders involved in implementing different initiatives. In some countries, a single organizational structure may be responsible for different areas, while in some other countries, these responsibilities can be divided among different organizations and institutions. In this context, the institutional arrangements can be organized in 5 components, like organizational mandates, expertise, data flows, coordination systems and tools, and stakeholders engagement. When preparing a report, countries need to decide to what extent they report on the institutional, legal, and policy framework in their BTRs. Through the next few slides, I will introduce and explain two ways in which this issue can be approached. One of these ways is by taking a light touch approach that would involve limiting your reporting to only the key aspects of your institutional, legal, and policy framework. For example, providing only high-level overview of key acts, laws, and policies that mandate government and other actors to engage in adaptation, then also key adaptation policy instruments and key institutional arrangements or coordinating mechanisms for adaptation planning. This light touch actually can reduce the burden required to prepare the report, and it's lighter experience for the reader and for, of course, for reviewers. Also, in case where countries have already reported in depth on their institutional, legal, and policy framework in previous reports to UNFCCC, if there has no been major changes, countries could simply cross-reference to these descriptions and instead focus on provided updates for other parts of the BTR where there has been progress or a certain change. However, the obvious drawbacks of this light touch approach are that audience will only be able to get a basic impression on how adaptation is governed in your country through reading your BTR on its own. One good example of how a light touch approach can be seen is the United Kingdom's adaptation communication. And in this document, the United Kingdom identifies and to a limited extent describes how responsibility for adaptation is divided between the four member countries of the United Kingdom. Then the legal basis for adaptation and some key institutional arrangements, or in this case, those established by the Climate Change Act only. Further, the information on the other side of these links is actually quite heavy, and sometimes it has more than 200 pages. And therefore, by not providing even a bit more information, the UK has given readers a choice of either understanding very little or having to read a very, very large document behind these links. The other way is that countries may take a more comprehensive approach to providing this information. This approach would enable the reader to better understand how it facilitates adaptation process. Achieving this would involve providing more detailed description of their institutional, legal, and policy framework, and could include all aspects of the country's institutional, legal, and policy framework, then providing more information on the objectives and modalities of specific institutional arrangements and legal and policy instruments, then identifying linkages between institutional arrangements and the legal policy instruments, identifying the actors involved in adaptation planning and implementation and describing their roles and responsibilities in that process, and reporting on institutional arrangements and legal policy instruments. Countries also can extend this information and also report on the different strengths, limitations, and gaps for the institutional, legal, and policy framework, and include where information on where institutional arrangements are missing or needed, and also to highlight where institutions are unable to, or they are ineffective at fulfilling their mandate. Such information, however, would likely need to come from some assessments, those conducted during the scoping process for NAP or for NDC. So just to quickly sum up, it is important to say that there is no right or a wrong approach to reporting on institutional, legal, and policy framework. And instead, each country will need to decide on how they approach to this task based on what they want to achieve through providing this information. So let's move to the section B, which requires information about impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities. The main goal of the section B is to ensure that countries provide information about what climate change looks like within the geographic scope of their country, how their country is vulnerable to impacts of climate change, and how climate change and its impacts are projected to evolve in line with the future or expected climate change. As with the section A, the information requested here can be divided in two broad categories. Information about climate trends, impacts, and vulnerabilities under the bullet point A of the paragraph 107, and information about methodologies and tools used in your analysis and assessment that you can find in bullet points B and C of the same paragraph. So the first area, climate trends, impacts, and vulnerabilities. Information about present and future climate trends, impacts, and vulnerabilities is requested by bullet point A and B of the section B. Logically, reporting on this area would be done over two main steps. First is to describe the past and projected changes in climate that country has experienced or is facing, and describing how the country is vulnerable to and is being impacted by changes in climate, and how these vulnerabilities and impacts are expected to develop in the future. The first step and information requested about current and projected climate trends and hazard. And in this first step, information is going to come from assessment of past meteorological data combined with climate modeling exercise. The reference to both climate trends and hazards in the guidelines implies that countries should, if possible, include information about past and projected changes in the frequency and strength of natural disasters related to climate change, as well as information about the longer-term trends that can be typically included in adaptation-related reports. Additionally, countries could include description on how the results of the most recent climate modeling are different from the previous attempts. So how has the situation changed over the time, or since the last assessment was conducted? And to conclude, has the situation become more severe? The second step is covered by bullet point B, asks countries to provide information about the observed and potential impacts of the climate change, including sectoral, economic, social, and or environmental vulnerabilities. The second part of this request, including sectoral, economic, social, and environmental vulnerabilities, suggests that countries should provide disaggregated information about how key dimensions of the certain country are vulnerable. Practically, this is likely to mean key economic sectors, agriculture, water, health, industry, then human systems like cities, regions, or environmental systems like coastal zones, ecosystem, protected sites, etc. Information relating impacts and vulnerabilities will need to come from impact risks and vulnerability assessments, many of which will be conducted by your national governments as part of the preparing your national communications or national adaptation strategies or other adaptation plans and documents. Moving to the next section requested by bullet point B, which is the information about the methodologies and tools used in your analysis and assessment of climate trends and past and future adaptation impacts and vulnerabilities. The request for this information is made by bullet point C, which asks countries to provide information about approaches, methodologies, and tools, and associated uncertainties and challenges. This section is asking countries to be transparent and describe how and where information about past and projected climate change impacts and vulnerabilities come from, as well as to highlight any uncertainties and challenges associated with the approaches, models, tools, and data used for this process. In cases where information comes from one institutional process that are conducted periodically by countries, like climate projections or national risk assessments that are conducted every 5 years, countries could also identify and describe these processes in detail. This approach, adopted by the, United Kingdom's adaptation communication, provides audience with overview of information about climate change, changes and impacts, risks and vulnerabilities, instead of presenting the results of projections and risk assessments documents. So information included in this description includes identifying the process, identifying institutions and actors that were involved in the process, outlining the scope or limitation of these processes and how they have recently been enhanced, and highlighting where these processes were last undertaken or will next be updated. When adopting the light touch approach, it would be good practice to ensure that report provides links to publicly accessible websites, reports, and other resources, which then enables the reader to access the much more technical and detailed information that is not being included in your basic report. This information could also include detailed explanation of approaches, methodologies, models, and processes. Before I conclude this presentation, I would like to provide some reflections on the reporting on climate trends, impacts, and vulnerabilities. Basically, guidelines for reporting on climate trends, impacts, and vulnerabilities under the BTR have not really changed from those issued for national communication in Decision 17 CP8. And countries should be well aware of what they are required to report in response to this section. So you can use your adaptation section of your national communication. In any case, reporting on climate changes, impacts, and key vulnerabilities remains one of the most important dimensions of the national communication for non-annex and for all non-annex 1 parties and annex 1 parties. And this probably will continue through BTRs. This is because actually it represents an opportunity for the countries to effectively communicate to the international community how climate change is impacting your country and how climate change is expected to continue to impacting your country. Also, reporting context of this information is vital for adequately framing why certain areas have been identified as priorities for your adaptation process and why the certain adaptation actions have been selected by your country. Also, it is crucial for framing the scale and magnitude of your country's adaptation needs. So to do that effectively, countries need to ensure that information provided in these reports is clear, enough comprehensive and easy to read, regardless of how robust or technically advanced the assessment underlying these informations are. To finish this section, I would like to highlight the third national communication of the Bangladesh as an example of a report that does a really excellent job of presenting the climate impacts and the country that country is facing and its many vulnerabilities to these impacts. So national communication of Bangladesh provides readers with a comprehensive and long section about impacts and vulnerability. So this section is very well structured and chapter is effective in presenting on how key climate variables have changed over the past 5-6 decades and how key sectors and geographic areas are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In particular, vulnerability assessment in these national communications are extremely well written in detail. And as a result, they provide a reader with a clear idea of many different ways in which the sector or region in the question is being impacted and is expected to continue to be impacted by certain climate hazards. These sectoral and geographic assessment do a really great job of communicating the magnitude of impacts and risks through good use of statistic and informative visualizations, which you can see here on the right side of the slide. All in all, this approach demonstrates that the scale of the past and future climate hazards, the size of the area at risk, and past and anticipated losses and damage during the climate impacts. We are going back to our base table about BTR sections, where you can see for sections C and D that they request information about the forward-looking aspects of your country's national adaptation process, specifically adaptation priorities and barriers in section C, and adaptation plans and actions in section D. In the context of the reporting, providing information requested by these sections represents the first step in reporting on adaptation. As such, information requested by these sections is key to reporting on what your country is doing to adapt to the adverse effects of climate change that your country has identified in section B. In the next slides, we will focus on the section C. The main goal of the section C is to ensure that BTR present and describe your country's priority areas for adaptation. And in addition to this, guidelines also ask countries to provide information about barriers and gaps that are or expected to hinder or inhibit effective adaptation in your priority areas. Starting with the priority areas for adaptation. This information is requested by bullet point A and asks countries to provide information about domestic adaptation priorities. And in that context, the term priorities or priority areas can be understood as areas for which adaptation action is being prioritized during the high vulnerability to climate change, their relative strategic importance to the countries in question, mixture of these two, or their strategic importance in enabling adaptation. So what is defined as a priority area is fundamentally a country-led decision. So it's upon to each country. And priority areas can take a variety of shapes and forms. However, the most often or most recognizable form of priority area are those that are sector-based. And these could include economic sectors, like sectors and industries, policy areas, like disaster risk reduction, poverty alleviation, etc., focusing regions, like specific regions, areas or cities, types of the regions, like rural or urban areas. Also ecosystems like rainforests, wetlands, coral reefs, protected areas, etc. Also, while we have here framed priority area as sectoral, priority areas can also be cross-cutting in their nature. In other words, they can relate to areas that are key in enhancing the enabling environment for adaptation, planning, and implementation. And they could include institutional capacity building, strengthening climate information services, mobilization of the resources, strengthening awareness and knowledge of climate change impacts. As the first and key step in developing adaptation strategy or plan, it would be expected priority areas to be identified within the key planning instruments. For a developing country, this is mostly national determined contributions, national adaptation plans, or other flagship development plans, or development plans that have climate change mainstreamed or included in them. So this information may also be identified in other planning-oriented instruments like laws, strategies, and other countries' planning-oriented documents. With all information requested by the BTR guidelines, countries actually need to decide on how they are going to report on their domestic adaptation priorities in their BTRs. As we mentioned in last presentation, over the next few slides, I will introduce and explain two broad ways in which this can be approached. The first one is the light touch approach to reporting on adaptation priorities. And It identifies the key areas that country considers to be priority for adaptation. Since any priority areas are likely to have been established by planning or policy instruments, if possible, BTR should identify which planning or policy instruments establish these areas as priorities, and thereby allowing interested readers to locate this information elsewhere. A nice example of how this approach would look in practice can be seen again. I will mention national communication of the Bangladesh that you can see in the table on the right side. In this example, Bangladesh simply lists 14 adaptation priorities in the table format that have been identified as a priorities by its first NDC and its most recent flagship development plan. This, as we can see in the picture of the right, is on the right side, is a very good and efficient way of ensuring that this information is included clearly in the large international reports. Additionally, when reporting on specific adaptation priorities, countries should describe the priority, including when and where it was set. So identify statement or plan, piece of legislation. So where the area was originally designed as a priority. Also, countries should elaborate on why it should be prioritized for adaptation, then describe any high-level goals or targets related with specific adaptation priority, and inform progress towards achieving these goals. So moving to a second area of information requested by Section C, barriers to adaptation. In addition to information about the priorities, Section C also asks countries to provide information about barriers, challenges, and gaps to adaptation. While this term is often used to refer to capacity-related barriers, challenges, or gaps, for example, barriers related to insufficient technical capacities or financings, countries could also report on adaptation limits, hard or soft limits to adaptation that are caused by socioeconomic or environmental circumstances, if, of course, such information is relevant or available to the country in question. And I think this is the last slide. Information about the barriers and challenges gaps included in BTR would ideally result from structured process known and called barrier analysis. So in this process, barriers to both adaptation planning and implementation are systematically analyzed through engaging with experts and stakeholders. So where countries have conducted such assessments, descriptions of barriers, challenges, and gaps provided in the BTR should reflect the results of these analyses. And most likely, the barrier analysis is conducted during the preparation of your key planning instruments like NDCs and NAPs and other adaptation strategies. And then probably the most probable sources of data are analysis of barriers and gaps conducted during formulation of your national adaptation plans or adaptation strategies, as well as from evaluation of these plans and strategies. And as such, countries seeking information about barriers could expect to find this information within these specific documents. So thank you very much. This was the last slide for this second session. I will stop here now, and of course you are very much welcome if you have any questions or comments to the part that I've just presented. Brittany, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lajana, for the very comprehensive overview of the first three sections of the MPGs regarding adaptation communications for the BTR. This is, like you mentioned, it's not much different than the existing requirements for adaptation communications. Are there any questions or comments from our colleagues and participants in the room? Doubts or questions that you may have encountered when putting together, your own adaptation sections of your BTR or similar communications, whether on institutional arrangements or legal arrangements or even the priority sectors. If no questions, then we have some questions for you to see how this information has been absorbed. It's plenty of information, but as Slajana mentioned, this section, especially for reporting on adaptation priorities, is usually of high interest for non-Annex 1 countries, for developing countries, in other words, and especially small island coastal states. So there's often a lot to share.
Maybe I just could add in regards of the institutional and legal frameworks that this is really basic precondition for implementation of your adaptation, but also for reporting. So if you have established your institutional framework responsibilities and also defined legal framework about the responsibilities of the institutions, that's really main precondition in order to streamline your adaptation process as well as organize your adaptation reporting process. And actually, we saw that through many examples when countries are, challenging with experiencing challenges when it comes to reporting or certain area on adaptation. We always find that their institutional framework is not well set up or not defined in sufficient details, so that disables the country to really do what is needed in order to implement adaptation actions and measures defined in your strategies and plans, and also to mainstream your reporting process. So just wanted to highlight this since I really think that's of key importance for all processes, but not just for adaptation. Also for mitigation, but since we are now in the adaptation, I'm underlining that for this purpose. So over to you, Brittany. So I see.
Yes, I see. Thanks, Lajana. I see. Yes, we have a hand up from Consuela. Please go ahead, Consuela.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your explanation related the communication of adaptation as it comes to the BTR, the new enhanced transparency framework of the UNFCCC. I think for sure there are some institutional framework in place, especially for the responsibility of some governmental institutions or agencies to report on progress related to adaptation. But I think the challenge is the coordination or the frequent structural um, coordination or meetings um, to have up to date information on several activities done in different institutions. I'm just calling out some institution as, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Environment, or even the Ministry of Forestry. So I think the challenge in our case, as it comes to reporting on adaptation communication, it's more the structural coordination, having the meetings like maybe twice per year, coming together, briefing each other on what has been done related to adaptation in our country in order to have those information to report to the UNFCCC. So I think for that, that's something we need to think about, or to coordinate on our aspect, um, especially when to have a more up-to-date information. I think related to monitoring of areas that has been how do you say identified where these activities are implemented is also a challenge, like the capacity, but also having the equipments or the tools to do those kind of monitoring. So with that, I hope to contribute to this discussion from the perspective of Suriname. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Consuela. I think definitely you really touched on what is really the reality of of what it is to report on adaptation. It's to report and to track progress is requires the coordination that's uh, often mixed with coordination for various other national processes, not only adaptation but various other areas. I think that's a very common occurrence, and I'm curious to see if that is the case for other countries as well. I see we have another hand up from Ansel. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Brittany and colleagues. I don't know if this is the place to ask this question, but I will, or maybe it's going to be a comment. I don't know how it will come out, but I would imagine that many of the countries would face one of the challenges would face for these reporting and gathering this information would be the finances, right? And from my understanding, many times the national communications would be funded through funding from the Global Environmental Facility. But I'm just thinking two things. I know that many of the countries have the the readiness projects from the GCF, and I'm starting to see linkages between as you gather information to report for national communication and maps and so on. Those could also be elements could I think could also be fitted into your country program for the GCF. And also then when it comes to the asking entities like the 5Cs to help writing proposals, those same information there could be your climate rationale. And so in essence, if you have it well coordinated, you could actually be killing, I shouldn't say we use this catching two birds or that we don't say killing again, right? Because we don't kill birds again. But you can be hitting multiple targets at the same time, right? So that is what I wanted to say. And it'd be good to hear from countries if this is what is happening at the moment, or could it be expanded? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ansel, for that perspective. Also from the regional institution standpoint, yeah, I think and from the project coordination standpoint, usually very helpful to integrate all of the climate objectives if everything is well coordinated. Sajana, I think you were about to say something. Go ahead.
Oh, yes, thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Ansel, for your comment and a question. Yes, the financing of the reporting is one issue, but also I would like to note something that I've learned recently in the Adaptation Academy that I've participated 10 days ago in Bangkok, where people from UNFCCC actually went more deeply into details of the national adaptation planning, as as it's now recognized and actually designed as a crucial document for streamlining adaptation process and planning and implementation, etc., etc. And one of the documents, one of the rare documents that have financial support for development by, as you said, by GCF through the Readiness Project. And as a colleague from UNFCCC says, there that all countries needs to develop and submit their national adaptation plans by end of the 2025. So GCF within its readiness program provides support for development of the NAPs, as I said, since they are recognized as one of the base and key documents for further adaptation process. And also just to say, and you probably know that adaptation is somehow neglected comparing to the mitigation, which is, countries are doing, trying to reduce emissions, which is really great to have such ambitious ambitions and goals. But in the same time, adaptation is somehow in the corner, and now international community is trying to, to make step forward in the context of the adaptation implementation, and to source funds, and not just for adaptation planning, but also for implementation of adaptation measure plans, strategies, etc., etc. So, as you also may be aware that at last COP, they established the adaptation fund, and hopefully at this COP, this fund will actually somehow start to work, and will have sources, because adaptation needs, funding needs for adaptation are really, really enormous. So all countries needs to think about that, and those developed to support developing countries to streamline adaptation processes. So that was in short. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a good perspective, Sajana, and coming from recently the adaptation. I forget the name of the global workshop that
Adaptation Academy. Oh,
Adaptation
it's okay.
Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the funding is, it's adaptation is, you're right, often takes severe underfunding in comparison. Consuela, please come back.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to come in on the part of that finances are available for developing countries. Indeed, I've heard about the adaptation fund, but what I also heard is that in in order to receive those funding, there is quite a list of requirements that need to be in place. So I just want to hear from you, Slajana, in the case of developing countries and maybe some experiences or good practices is like what are the chances of developing country to get this funding? Is this a big challenge to make sure that the requirements are in place to be able to get this funding? So this is one thing I heard, that it's not easy for developing country to get this funding. So maybe to hear from you about maybe good practices from developing country to be able to went to this process before getting this funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, but I'm really not right person for addressing this issue. So I just to say that it's recognized and raised by many countries that procedures for funding of the adaptation actions and measures within the GCF is really not easy to get. And the procedures for projects approval are very strict and demanding, requiring lots of work. So I personally participated in one project preparation, like 50 million US dollars, but the process of the preparation of the project proposal lasts like 4 years. So you have to, mm, mm, maybe to think about that. It is pointed out by countries, by developing countries, that that they cannot fulfill all these requirements. So instead they will take a credit, not funds from the GCF or some easier funding sources. And it is requested from GCF to, adapt these procedures and to allow countries to get the funding. So I really hope, I don't know, but I really hope that that will happen soon. And that is something that I expect at COP, COP 29, that is in front of us. So that is something I expect, and about the adaptation fund and etc. etc. So the countries will sit and agree about how to increase funding and enable developing countries to reach the funds for adaptation. So yeah, not really answer, but yeah. Yeah, I fully agree with you, because I know I went through whole process, and now I know how it's hard for several iterations, etc., etc. And also, what is interesting, the countries needs to provide contributions. So if you ask from GCF uh, 1 million, but entire project is like 100 millions. The procedure is the same. You have to follow GCF procedure. So that is something that needs to be solved at a higher level, and to on countries. Honestly, I'm not representative of countries, but at the COP, at the next COP, countries the country representatives needs to address that again and again, since this is really an issue for them. Thank you.
Thank you. No, and thank you to all of our colleagues here and participants engaging in this discussion. These are the tough questions, and the questions that, you're right, Seljana, will need to be addressed and pushed by the parties at this upcoming COP and following to operationalize these funds. Okay, I would like to, while we're still on this topic of the first three sections of the MPGs, to bring your attention to a short quiz, very short, before we step into our next presentation from our country representative to hear the country's experience on institutional arrangements, legal arrangements, etc. So please you can either click the link in the chat that will take you to Mentimeter, or you can scan the screen, scan this QR code, or go to www.menti.com and enter the code on the screen. Very short 3 questions to lock in some of this information. You're good. And you could give a thumbs up once you're in. Okay. Seen. Okay. All right, so we have a few in. You can keep joining for those who have just joined us. So the BTR asks countries to provide information on national circumstances, on adaptation actions, institutional arrangements in government, and legal frameworks. And this is in section A of the MPGs. True or false? Five more seconds. All right, well done. Hi. Sajana, everyone, your session is well received. Very good. Excellent, everyone. Okay. All right, everyone on the same level. Second question. Here we go. As adaptation reporting is a country-driven exercise, countries should feel free to determine whether they want to do this or not. True or false? Now, we're a bit split on this one, but the answer is true. So recalling that the adaptation reporting, especially in the BTR and otherwise, as well as adaptation communications are voluntary for countries. It's country driven, and so it is beneficial, but it is at the end of the day at the discretion of the country to report or share this information. So the answer is true. The other one. Okay. Coming in strong, top 4, top 5. Okay, third question. Section B of the MPGs, the BTR asks for information on climate trends and vulnerabilities, B, methodologies and tools used, and C, support needed, received and needed. True or false? And thank you for the love, whoever is clicking the heart in Menti. Oh no. Okay, so where this was a tricky one, right? Right, Slajana? Yeah, so it's all of the above, A and B, except for C, right? Support needed and received is not a section under section B. This is actually another chapter of the BTR entirely. But fair enough. That one is tricky. Okay. Last one. In section B? Oh, okay. So now this is your chance to redeem yourself. We already know this is a repeat of the last question. So I hope everyone got that one right. This is, all right. Very good. So well done to our top three. It's a tie. So thank you everyone for participating and working, putting the knowledge in the first part of the session to use. Thanks so much. Well done. Okay. So now I would like to introduce our very special guest. We have our first country representative on this webinar series. So this is Ms. Sharissa Buckle from Jamaica, Senior Technical Officer for Adaptation at the Climate Change Division at the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation of Jamaica. Very excited to hear from her and the country experience on reporting adaptation under existing reporting arrangements and hearing some of this experience from Jamaica on the first three areas that we discussed today on the arrangements, as well as adaptation, prioritization, and barriers. So welcome, Sharissa. Please.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm going to share my screen now. There we go.
Very good. We can see your screen.
You can see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So good morning, everyone. Again, I'll be presenting on adaptation reporting under the Enhanced Transparency Framework of the Paris Agreement. Let's first start out with a definition of adaptation. Adaptation refers to the adjustments in ecological and social or economic systems in response to an actual or expected climatic stimuli and their effects. It refers to the changes in process, practices, structures to moderate potential damages or to benefit from opportunities associated with climate change. So the introduction to the Enhanced Transparency Framework, the FT was established under the Paris Agreement, particularly under Article 8, to provide transparency on climate actions and support. It requires biannual transparency report, BTRs, from all countries, including information on mitigation, adaptation, and support received and provided. Introduction to the Enhanced Transparency Framework. There are several vehicles for reporting, and they are the biannual transparency report. And this is a report that is submitted by countries every 2 years under the Paris Agreement to show their progress in reducing greenhouse gases and adapting to climate change. Includes information about actions taken, emissions data, and support received or provided. And then we have adaptations communication, which is completely voluntary by countries to share how they are adapting to climate change. And these reports can include their plans, priorities, and actions that are taken to reduce impacts of climate change on their people and environments. So adaptation reporting on the ETF. Adaptation reporting is important as it helps to track progress, identify gaps, and assess vulnerabilities, as well as supports global stock taking by assessing collective progress towards climate goals. No, I'm sorry, this is not the correct presentation. I'm going to share my screen again.
Not a problem.
Sure. Can you see my screen? Can everyone see my screen? Okay, great.
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay. So key elements of adaptation under ETFs are national circumstances, adaptation priorities, adaptation actions, and monitoring and evaluation. All right, so now we're going to go into the key elements of adaptation reporting in the Jamaican context. I want to particularly note that Jamaica has done 3 national communications and is in the progress of doing the 4th. We have submitted an adaptation communication in 2022. We have done 1 biannual update report and in progress of doing another one. And we are in the process of doing a NAP and also updating our NDC. And we also have an ongoing Red Plus project. Elements of adaptation reporting under the ETF for Jamaica. First, I would like to talk about our national circumstances. Jamaica's circumstances for adaptation reporting under the ETF of the Paris agreements are shaped by our vulnerabilities to climate change and our commitments to meeting international obligations. As you know, we are SIDS, which are small island states, and we are exposed to sea level rise, increased frequency and intensity of tropical storms, hurricanes, floods, and droughts. And also, we have unique economic and environmental limitations, such as financing adaptation measures and also dealing with the cost of climatic impacts. We also have to look at the national priorities, which are shaped by the need to address the country's vulnerability to climate change, particularly in areas of agriculture, water resources, coastal zones, and human health. I also would like to particularly note that Jamaica, under adaptation planning, national planning, we have the Jamaica Climate Change Policy Framework, which was updated in 2023, and also the National Adaptation Plan, which we're currently working on, which will guide adaptation efforts. And the NAP will also identify priority areas for resilience building across sectors, including water, health, agriculture, and tourism. And the country's institutional capacity is being strengthened to monitor and report and verify adaptation actions, with the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation playing a key role. As I have stated before, our adaptation priorities are agriculture and food security, national and disaster risk management. And the challenges with agriculture is that agriculture is highly sensitive to climate change, particularly droughts and extreme weather conditions, and shifting growing seasons. Because of this, we have tried and we are continuing to do or promote climate smart agriculture practices, including drought resistant crops, improved irrigations and sustainable land management, and diversification of agricultural systems through agroforestry crop rotation and organic farming to increase resilience, strengthening agricultural research and extension of services to support farmers in adopting adaptive technologies and techniques, and increasing the use of early warning systems and climate forecasting to help farmers better manage risks. As it relates to disaster risk management, challenges that we face is that we're particularly vulnerable to hurricanes, especially with the recent passing of Hurricane Beryl, tropical storms, and flooding leading to socioeconomic impacts. And what we have done is to strengthen disaster preparedness and response systems, including early warning systems, evacuation protocols, and emergency infrastructures.
Sorry for
Building
interruption.
Sure.
We see just one slide. Is that okay? Or is
Yeah, that is okay because
okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So we strengthen disaster risk preparedness and response, including early warning systems, evacuation protocols, and emergency infrastructure. We are also building resilience infrastructure such as storm water drains, flood defenses, and retrofitting vulnerable buildings to withstand extreme weather conditions. Also, when it comes on to adaptation actions, these are geared towards enhancing resilience and reducing vulnerability, particularly in the context of key sectors such as agriculture, water resources, health, and coastal management. And as it relates to that, Jamaica has implemented projects such as the Integrating Management of Yalas and Hope River Watersheds project that focus on protecting water resources and mitigating drought risks in critical areas. The actions under this was reforestation, a sustainable land management practice to improve water retention and engaging in sustainable agricultural practices. Monitoring and evaluation is also critical in tracking Jamaica's progress in adapting to climate change and ensuring that actions are taken to effective, efficient, and aligned with national priorities and international commitments. Jamaica has established various frameworks and systems to monitor and evaluate climate adaptation efforts, including, or for example, you have the Green Climate Fund project evaluation, which primary objective is to ensure that the projects funded by the GCF in Jamaica meet the desired adaptation goals and contribute to the country's resilience. And the key elements under it are to have midterm reviews and evaluations, which are required for all GCF funded products, and data is collected on the project outcomes such as improvements in water management, flood prevention, and capacity building. And then we also have evaluation reports, which are submitted to the GCF. And these also include stakeholder feedback, lessons learned, and recommendations for future programming. Now let's look at the legal framework. Jamaica's legal framework relating to climate adaptation is embedded in several key national policies, plans, and legislation. These instruments align with the country's broader goals of climate resilience and sustainability, reflecting its commitments under international agreements such as the Paris Agreement. And as I have stated earlier, we have the Climate Change Policy Framework, and this is one of the most comprehensive documents guiding Jamaica's climate actions. It provides overarching policy directions as it relates to climate adaptation and mitigation and disaster risk reduction. It emphasizes promoting development of climate resilient infrastructure and sustainable land use, and it also aligns with obligations under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. We also have national development plans such as Vision 2030, which specifically deals or includes Jamaica's climate adaptation as a key priority on the national environment goals. And it is a fourth outcome which focuses on hazard risk reduction and adaptation to climate change. This plan promotes adaptation strategies in agriculture, water, tourism, and coastal management preparedness. Then we're going to look at, before we look at that, we also have the Disaster Risk Management Act, which was done in 2015. And under that, we also have the Disaster Risk Management Review Committee that has been newly formed. And the mandate of that committee is to review and evaluate the country's disaster risk preparedness across several sectors and recommend improvements. Also, let's look at the institutional arrangements. So in Jamaica, the institutional arrangements for climate change and adaptation are structured across several government ministries, agencies, and stakeholders, reflecting a coordinated approach to addressing resilience. These key elements are: you have the Government of Jamaica, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, the Climate Change Division, which tasked with the responsibility of overseeing national climate change policy, including adaptation. The CCD on the MPGs plays a key role in coordinating adaptation efforts and formulating climate-related policies. The CCD acts as a national designated authority that assists in climate finance and finance for adaptation projects, from the Green Climate Fund. Also, you have the Climate Change Focal Point Network, which is interministerial and interagency cooperation. And this network includes or consists of climate change focal points in key areas, departments, and agencies. Along with, we're trying to get persons from private sector to participate in it as well. They are responsible for mainstreaming climate change adaptation into sectorial policies, projects and programs ensuring coherence and coordination across sectors such as agriculture, health, tourism, and infrastructure. We recently concluded one of the Climate Change Focal Point Network meetings in September of this year. Look at climate change impacts and vulnerabilities. In Jamaica, the vulnerabilities and impacts of climate change vary across different sectors, necessitating the target adaptation measures. The country faces a range of climate-related risks, including rising temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, sea level rise, and an increase in the frequency and intensity of weather events such as hurricanes, droughts, and floods. And we have in agriculture, the vulnerabilities. Jamaica's agricultural sector is highly vulnerable to changes in temperature, rainfall, extreme weather events, and climate change leads to drought, floods, and hurricanes that may affect crop yields, livestock health, and overall food security. Prolonged drought stress water resources, while intense storms damage crops and disrupt supply chains and soil fertility. And the impact of this, you have reduced crop production, increased pest infestation, and loss of arable land due to soil erosion and high costs of irrigation. You also have water resources and or vulnerability as it relates to that is altered rainfall patterns linked to both droughts and intense rain events, fresh water supply during droughts, and increased water demand put pressure on the country's water resources. And the impact of that is decreased water availability for drinking, agriculture, and industrial use, which is very critical when it comes on to food security and also how we supply our local markets and our international markets. Then you also have coastal zones and tourism. And vulnerabilities is the coastal zones are particularly at risk from sea level rise and coastal erosion. Storm surges. Jamaica's tourism industry is heavily dependent on beaches, coral reefs, and coastal ecosystem, and it is extremely vulnerable to any climatic change. Climate change also affects our biodiversity, marine ecosystems, and infrastructure in coastal areas. And this impact will have a loss of beach areas and tourist attractions, which will also have an economic impact on us, as well as destruction of coral reefs, which are critical to tourism and fisheries, damage to hotels, damage to tourism infrastructure due to storm surges and hurricanes. Also, we have sea level rise. The vulnerability is coastal areas where the majority of Jamaica's population, industries, and tourism activities are located are at high risk due to sea level rise. This leads to coastal erosion, salt water intrusion into freshwater systems, and loss of coastal systems like mangroves and coral reefs. However, we have tried and we are continued trying. We are trying to continue adapting to this by implementing eco-based adaptation methods or approaches. Jamaica has adopted EBA approaches, including mangroves restoration, coral reef protection, and the creation of marine protected areas. These natural barriers help to protect the coastline from erosion and buffer the impacts of sea level rise. Also, we have food security, which is closely linked to agriculture. Vulnerability The climate change poses a significant threat to agriculture, which is a primary source of food and livelihoods for many Jamaicans. Increased temperatures, unpredictable rainfall patterns, and extreme weather events disrupt food production, reduce yields, and increase food prices. And the impact on adaptation. What I've said earlier, we are trying to introduce climate-smart agricultural practices, including crop diversification, improved irrigation systems, and sustainable land management. And these are vital for ensuring long-term food security. The promotion of urban agriculture and resilient supply chains can also help to reduce these vulnerabilities. Now, let's look at the barriers. Of our barriers that we face in adaptation, planning and reporting is limited access to funds. One of the biggest barriers is a lack of adequate financial resources to fund adaptation projects. Jamaica, as a developing country, faces difficulty in accessing sufficient funds from international sources, such as the Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and other global mechanisms. Limited technical expertise. There is a shortage of specialized skills and knowledge in the areas of climate modeling, risk assessment, adaptation planning, and engineering solutions for climate resilience. This technical gap makes it difficult for Jamaica to design and implement complex adaptation projects. Capacity building. Many sectors, including agriculture, infrastructure, and disaster risk management, require more consistent capacity building to equip professionals with the tools and knowledge to address climate change challenges. Data gaps. We have inadequate data collection and monitoring systems, which makes it difficult to accurately assess the climate risk and track the effectiveness of adaptation measures. The country needs more localized climate projects and risk assessment to inform policy and decision making. And the lessons learned from adaptation reporting, we see from countries like Morocco and Vietnam, they have demonstrated success by reporting adaptation efforts on a sector-by-sector basis, which allows for more targeted and comprehensive reporting. And the application for Jamaica can improve its adaptation reporting by focusing on sector adaptation efforts in agriculture, tourism, water resources, health, and infrastructure, providing detailed report on sectoral vulnerabilities and adaptation measures taken with each sector will help to showcase the progress being made and the challenges that remain. And with the introduction of the climate change focal point network, this will also assist in the sector-specific adaptation efforts and reporting. Also, building capacity for monitoring and evaluation and reporting. We can learn from countries such as Germany and South Africa how they have developed frameworks to help to track progress of adaptation action, assess their effectiveness, and inform future decision making. And in the context of Jamaica, we are trying to focus on building capacity within ministries and local authorities to monitor and evaluate adaptation projects. This includes developing a clear indicators, methodologies, and data collection protocols to track the outcomes of adaptation interventions, whilst strengthening technical expertise in adaptation monitoring will also be key to improving the quality of reporting. And that's it. Thank you.
Sharissa,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing all of the efforts from Jamaica. I think it's very clear the level of effort that that the country is making in reporting, but as well as tracking progress and coordinating with the different entities and across different projects. And it's really nice that you also included some of the lessons that you could learn from other countries and how they do it. I think that's also a very important part of uh, the learning process. So very well done, and thank you so much
Thank you.
for sharing for sharing so much. I think there's a lot that we can learn. So I would like to turn it to our participants in the room. This is we have a great example of adaptation reporting arrangements, legal frameworks, even on monitoring and evaluation. Um, do you have any questions or comments for our colleague Sharisa from the CCD in Jamaica regarding the process, or even relaying similarities or differences from your own processes or what you're familiar with? In the meantime, then, while we see if anyone from the room would like to ask something, I would like to ask a question, Sharisa.
Sure.
Yeah, I see. I mean, you mentioned at the very beginning that you have various national processes and reporting
Yes.
underway, and you
Yes.
have your main climate change policy framework, and also
Right.
your Disaster Risk Management Act. Uh, what is briefly what is the experience um, in coordinating this for adaptation, in addition to the other processes that you have underway? As I imagine that your climate change policy framework covers other areas as well, apart from adaptation. So just briefly
Yes.
your experience there.
So it also covers mitigation as well, but let's focus on adaptation. Seeing that we're looking at adaptation, um, it can be quite difficult because you're looking not only on one specific area or one specific sector, but you're looking at coordination from ministries. And sometimes data um, may not be that forthcoming. However, as I stated in my presentation, we have mechanisms or frameworks such as the Climate Change Focal Point Network and the Climate Change Advisory Board that assist in the coordination of getting information as it relates to climate change mitigation and adaptation in order for us to collect the necessary data to produce the communication, the national communications, the biannual updates, and other updates that are in progress.
Excellent. Thanks so much for 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 stating that so clearly. We have another colleague, Adrian Spencer from the in the chat. Please go ahead and take the mic.
All right, thank you, and sorry for joining it. Sharisa, thanks for that presentation. So I'm actually at the University of the West Indies here in Jamaica.
Yes.
I don't know to what extent the sort of national plans incorporate a lot of what happens in academia. I noticed that you did mention, efforts from the private sector and a number of government entities and so on. One of the things that I can speak of from an academic standpoint is that we often receive a lot of donor funding for certain projects, a lot of which have, sort of specific reporting requirements. And oftentimes I think these are actually excluded from some of the broader national picture, and I think that we need to find a way to integrate some of these into some of the national efforts, because oftentimes it's not necessarily a lack of the availability of data, but it's actually putting your finger on the data. So, one of the things that we constantly talk about is providing or creating something like a data repository where projects can actually be noted. People far and wide can actually see what's happening within a particular space and so on and so forth, because there is a lot happening on the ground, which we are sometimes happening in silos, which most of the people who should be aware of the information basically are not. So again, the real question was, the involvement of academia in some of these broader national plans.
Thank you for your question. As it relates to the involvement of academia, academia is involved in terms of you have the UA Climate Studies Group that also helps in producing the third National Communications Plan. As it relates to the data repository, I can't remember the specific name of the repository, but PIOJ, which is a Planning Institute of Jamaica, does have a repository of data and also as it relates to projects. And if my memory serves me correct, one person from academia does serve on the Climate Change Advisory Board. So involvement of academia is key in our adaptation efforts and our climate change efforts.
All right, thanks for that, Cherise. Sorry.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both, Sharisa, Adrian, and other colleagues for your questions. And Sharisa, again, thank you so much for sharing on the national experience. There's definitely a lot of work underway, and more, and here we see more linkages to be made with with some of academia in country and regionally, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
As it relates to Mr. Adrian's question, I would simply say that though we have academia, more can be done as it relates to getting information from academia. I believe that climate change is not a one-person initiative, but a countrywide initiative, a ministry, a government of Jamaica initiative, a private sector initiative, an academia initiative, because it doesn't affect one particular group, it affects all of us. So we do need a level of coordination or more coordination as relates to climate change.
Yes, definitely. I think that that stands true for coordination as one of your barriers also that you mentioned. That definitely stands true for most in this region, particularly with our small staff, small countries, and our stakeholders are often the same across all sectors, whether it's a mitigation or adaptation. So various challenges there. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yes, you are so welcome, and it's a definite pleasure. So colleagues, we are almost at the end of today's session, but we still have an option to reflect, to tie us in on the topics that were covered today. So we have two discussion questions on the screen for your last reflections before we wrap today. What are your country's experiences in assessing impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities? And we heard a great deal from Jamaica's perspective in assessing different areas. And the second question.
Oh, yes, same question.
The second question being, where can this information required to report on adaptation priorities and barriers and adaptation actions be sourced from?
So we have
We heard, at least from the first question, I know various countries in this region have done assessments, whether it's NAPs or vulnerability needs assessments in their different countries. Are there any thoughts on any of these two areas, or others from our speakers and experts in the room?
If I may jump in, and I just would like to continue on the previous presentation and the comment. First of all, just to say, Shariza, the information you shared through your presentation shows that you are ready for reporting your adaptation through BTR. So you provided almost all information. So I hope that that would be the case within your first BTR. Also, among other things you mentioned, you just said that the main challenge or monitoring and evaluation is still critical for you since you have data gaps and you need the data collection protocols, etc., etc. If that's only thing missing here, it's really great. I also heard that you have in your institutional and for policy framework some DRR, disaster risk reduction structure, so which is really great to hear. So as I said, I think that you are ready for reporting your adaptation in your BTR. And also, I would a bit reflect on these M&E and data gaps and on this what Mr. Adrian says about involvement of academia. Since, you know, from the experience of some developed countries, I see that they are using very much academia for their climate change processes. So academia is involved instead of some, you know, usually through the projects which are in the developing countries are somehow ad hoc or depend on the fundings available by multilateral funds, but also countries needs to think more strategically and to involve academia more in these processes, since then you don't have to outsourcing, you know, however you for certain assessments and analysis like vulnerability risk assessment or modeling exercise or climate projections, you need to engage somebody outside of your institution. So that can be somebody from your public institution, and to build up the team, their team of experts, and together with the students that they will learn and will continue to work on that for their country. So I suppose that that's possible, and that kind of the synergy between state and academia is possible. Of course, that requires the funding, but also if you have and you have got funding from the multilateral funds, it would be very, very good to use that in development of the capacities within the academia. professors, students, etc., to perform necessary work for you. So that's just one observation, not really a question or conclusion. Just one really thought from the experience I've learned from the other countries. So all of you are very much experienced in the assessing impacts and risks and vulnerabilities, especially through your national communication. So it would be good maybe to hear what experience do you have in that to share with us. So I'll stop now. Please raise your hand if you have anything to share with us.
Thanks. Thank you, Slajana. And I know we're right on the top of our closing time, but please, please, as you are join us and you continue to join us on this adaptation series, please reflect on what is happening in your own country, or in your region or the institution that you represent, to share, because all experiences are valid, and it's a big part of the lessons learned that we can from each other, especially with our similar circumstances. So as we approach the end, I would like to say thank you so much for joining us on our second session, second of 5 sessions on the webinar series on adaptation reporting under the ETF of the Paris Agreement. Thank you, of course, always to our in-house experts, Slajana, for providing the guidance institutionally as well as international experience to this context. And as always, we couldn't do it without you, our national representatives, the audience and countries that we serve in the Caribbean region in this transparency network, and to our presenter today, Sharisa Buckle from Jamaica, sharing those experiences. So please join us on our third session next week, October 21st. That's next week, Monday, at the same time, same place. The links will be shared to those who have registered to the first session and those who have joined today. So please join us on the next one. As usual, we will be sharing the material and the recording of these sessions on the Climate Transparency platform. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all, and have a nice rest of the day. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.